Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I am your host, Art Stapleton, and this is our special draft recap show, wrapping everything up. It's amazing. You know, you spend 4 months talking about the draft, and in a matter of 72 hours or so, everything gets done, you find out clarity, and then you get to make more assumptions as to what's going on. So on today's show, we'll go through the draft, who the Giants took, the fits of their 6 players that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have now attached their wagon to moving forward, their third draft class, and then we'll talk big picture Giants. Where do we go from here? And I kind of made this referendum on social media, on my Twitter account, and I'm going to say today is the day we settle all in business. And that's for the Giants, for the coverage, for where we're at. And as we move forward here into OTAs and then obviously mini camps and then the brief summer hiatus and then into training camp. So we're going to get to that. And before I get in there, I wanted to talk about Thursday night back at MetLife Stadium for the draft party, for our live show. I wanted to thank everyone again for coming by, the fans who came on and talked, the fans who didn't come on the show and talk, but were still there to support, to watch. Wanted to thank John Schmelk again from the Giants for coming on. You know, he's got a busy schedule on draft night, so appreciate him kind of doling out his information. You know, like I said, he goes for months talking to all these analysts around about Giant specific stuff with the draft. So give John a follow. It's Schmelk. And also, I'm sure you're familiar with this stuff on Giants.com. Special thanks to Bobby Okereke for taking a couple minutes to come on over and talk to us over at our set. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Paul Wood and the rest of our NorthJersey.com crew that helped produce the entire segment and show. Without them, we wouldn't have had a live experience out there. So again, year 2 at the draft party. Thought this year was more fun, more concise than last year, and hopefully we can move forward. And then in previous shows, just continue to get better and better and better, and do what we have to do to make this show the podcast you expect it to be. So that's our thanks for that. All of you continue to read our coverage on NorthJersey.com. The numbers have skyrocketed. We really appreciate you, and I appreciate you coming, clicking, reading, consuming, and everything that has to do with our coverage of the New York Giants and the NFL. I thank you. So let's get into today's show. And as I joked yesterday, you know I'm a big fan of The Godfather, and the joke I made yesterday isn't as much of a joke, is that today we take care of all the 5 families, okay? Barzini, Philip D'Italia, Mo Green, Strachey, Cuneo. You want to say who these people are? Well, the reality is the Giants fan base is divided right now, and it's continued to be divided. And it's my position right now to bring everybody together and to talk to all of the factions as to what's going on with the Giants, where they are. It's not my job to bring you all together to make peace, but peace between all the families makes for a more fun, more entertaining experience. Everybody is just yelling at each other. There's no reason for this. Now, there's a time and a place where one family needs to take over the rest, but the reality is this is the time. So we're going to go through these ideas before we get to the draft class, and I'm going to tell you my thoughts on what's going on. And I'm going to talk directly to you because you know who you are. First up, the Daniel Jones haters, okay? We get it. You assess this roster, you look at this team, you saw what Daniel Jones has been now going into year 6 of his career. You don't believe you can win a Super Bowl with Daniel Jones. Fine. I get it. I can't argue with you. I made the same argument the middle of last season. It's very concerning that Daniel Jones played the way he did last year. The injuries are big concerns. There are probably a lot of you who don't like Daniel Jones to begin with. He doesn't have much of a personality. You're going to make fun of the way he looks now, his Adam Gaze eyes, and in the Zoom call that we had at the beginning of the spring. Here's the reality. Daniel Jones is not as bad of a quarterback as you have currently made him out to be. Point blank, period. Daniel Jones can play in this league. I don't think he can lead a team to a Super Bowl in this league. I don't believe he's an upper echelon quarterback that is going to basically make everybody on this offense better. But Daniel Jones at his best, and his best is essentially what we saw in Minnesota in the playoffs, he could play good games. He's had games where, I've written, look, Daniel Jones, he's their guy. He's the Giants' guy. And I've fallen for the 3 or 4 games that Daniel Jones has played at an extremely high level. I get it. I'm now going back on that and saying I don't believe the Giants can win a Super Bowl with Daniel Jones. Now, can they build the roster to the point where all of a sudden they're hitting on all these picks and Daniel Jones is the quarterback? Sure, maybe. Maybe it happens. But for the guys who hate Daniel Jones, he's here for at least another year. Okay? We get it. We know what he can't do. But he's not as bad as you're making it out to be. And I know you're going to look at it and go, oh, well, why are you saying that? Now you're going backwards. Now you're just for the team. No, I'll stand by what I said. The Giants need a new franchise quarterback. But Daniel Jones is not a little leaguer playing in the majors. He can play when he's healthy and when things are good around him and he's not getting a pulp beat out of him in the backfield and he's not making bad decisions. That's where it's at. So to the Daniel Jones haters, the Philip Tatalias of the group, relax a little bit. Take a step back. Assess the situation for what it is. Daniel Jones is not as bad as what your caricature of Daniel Jones is right now. That's number one. Okay. Next family. The Daniel Jones stands. You love Daniel Jones. Konstantin Maroulis, my guy, American Idol fame, Broadway star. You're constantly blowing up Daniel Jones as if he's Patrick Mahomes. I love you, Konstantin. But the Daniel Jones stands, you guys are a little absurd too. All of a sudden, Daniel Jones is going to be the reason why the Giants don't draft a quarterback. That's not why the Giants didn't draft a quarterback. The Giants like Drake May. Despite what you may hear other reporters like Adam Schefter, who is essentially beyond reproach in terms of his sources in the league and what he can get confirmed. He puts it out there on Pat McAfee's show that the Giants weren't really thinking quarterback, that they were thinking about Joe Alt. But it's unconfirmed. But first off, if there's anything that Adam Schefter has in this league as far as information goes, nobody has a better chance of getting it confirmed or denied better than Adam Schefter. If Adam Schefter wants news confirmed, he can get the person to confirm it or to deny it. That's number one. So it wasn't even about confirming that the Giants were not interested in a quarterback. Fact is, the Giants were interested in Drake May. They weren't very confident that they would be able to trade up. I told you that I thought they would be able to trade up on Thursday night because I thought the Patriots, because they were putting it out there with their local beat, the idea that they were looking for more and that at the end of the day, they would have taken their best offer. Well, they didn't. They were taking May all along. They just wanted to string it out and make it seem like they were getting that Godfather deal. Again, we're back to Godfather. But the reality is that the Daniel Jones stands now want to look at this as, well, see, they're now drafting Malik Neighbors for Daniel Jones. No. They did not draft Malik Neighbors for Daniel Jones. They drafted Malik Neighbors for this offense. They needed a number one wide receiver. Malik Neighbors arguably was the best wide receiver in the draft. I thought he was just behind Marvin Harrison Jr., but there were people who like his skill set even more so, the explosiveness. We'll get to Neighbors as a prospect in a couple minutes, but just the idea that now all of a sudden Daniel Jones has been wronged by the Giants. Daniel Jones has never had an offensive line. Daniel Jones has never had offensive weapons. Daniel Jones, he needs help. Daniel Jones is not in year 3, okay? Daniel Jones is going into year 6. Some of what happened last year is on Daniel Jones. It's not just on the offensive line, which was a disaster. From the moment Andrew Thomas went out with the hamstring on a blocked field goal against the Cowboys on night 1, Daniel Jones was terrible. He was good in the second half. A lot of that was Saquon Barkley against Arizona. So you thought that Daniel was coming out of it. That was really just in a silo. That second half in Arizona was never duplicated by Daniel Jones and the rest of the starting offense for the rest of the season. What we saw with Tyrod Taylor and Tommy DeVito was a little different. But Daniel Jones, the injuries, yes. Talk to David Carr, former Giant backup. He was a number 1 pick when he was back in Houston. Talk to him about what a bad offensive line did to him. But eventually, it's not about the offensive line. Eventually, it's about the player. So the idea that the Daniel Jones stands now are holding on to this idea that, see, it was all a smokescreen. The Giants were really believing in Daniel Jones, and they were never going to take a quarterback. It's not true. They didn't tramps across the entire country and meet with these quarterbacks in order to reaffirm their stance on Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones was going to be their starter for week 1 this year. They wanted a quarterback that could come in, sit, learn, let Dable and Kafka and Tierney develop the quarterback. And then when that quarterback was ready, like Eli Manning in 2004, in theory, that quarterback would take over. Now, it didn't happen. Part of that is because of the draft board and the way the draft board fell. Don't let anyone tell you that the Giants didn't like J.J. McCarthy. They liked J.J. McCarthy. They didn't like J.J. McCarthy better than Malik Neighbors at 6. That's the reality. The reality is that they trusted their board. What did Joe Shane say in his pre-draft press conference? We're going to listen to our board. They put all the time and effort to build their board. It was obvious that Drake May was at the top of their board after Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels went off. Now, I believe Drake May was ahead of Jaden Daniels on their board. But the reality is, it's not that the Giants went into this draft saying we're not going to pick a quarterback. They went into this draft saying we are going to pick the best player on our board. And if that player is a quarterback, then that's what we will do. It didn't happen. Okay, so does that mean that all of a sudden Daniel Jones is their guy, is their future? He's their guy as far as he's going to take it. Now, that brings me to the next group. That's kind of the Daniel Jones stands, but not so much really. It's the idea of, well, Daniel Jones is a starter, so it doesn't matter what else happens. Look, Drew Lock is here. Now, Drew Lock was not told that he was going to start, but Drew Lock is going to compete for this job, and we will see how this plays out over the summer. Now, I don't believe Drew Lock will beat Daniel Jones out for week 1, but we don't know how Daniel Jones is going to react. His best quality, and I said this and I got some hack from some of the stands, was how could you say that his best quality is as a running quarterback? Because it's true. What made Daniel Jones as good as what he was in his best game in Minnesota in the playoffs. And I said this last week, and people kind of looked at it and said, oh, how fair is that? That could be his ceiling. That could be the best he will ever be. And that's the reality that the Giants have to deal with. And it belongs to Joe Shane and Brian Dable right now. They gave Daniel Jones the contract. So the reality is the contract was structured in a way where after 2 years, they were either going to be in position, if Daniel Jones had great years in 2023 and 2024, that they would be able to essentially rip up the contract and max it out and get Daniel Jones. Yes, it sounds ridiculous after last year, but get Daniel Jones a raise. Get him a new contract. Give him an opportunity. If he was as good as he looked in Minnesota and he kept growing and kept ascending and stayed healthy, that's what they would have done with the contract. But I had several people in the Giants organization heading into the combine this year tell me specifically, Joe Schoen structured the contract that way for a reason. He gave himself flexibility. Regardless of what Jones does in 2024, the Giants could either move on, and it's not a clean break. Let's stop saying that, because then if they move on from Daniel Jones for next year, it's $22 million on the salary cap in dead money. Yes, the salary cap is maneuverable and you can move things around and you could always get out of cap hell or put yourself in cap hell based on decisions that you make. But the reality is Daniel Jones is sitting at a situation where you've got to, well, see, there's Joe Schoen calling me, giving me another tip as to what's going on with the contract. But in all seriousness, the contract itself for Daniel Jones, it's not a great thing that you take on $22 million in dead cap for next year. But because then you have to look at which quarterback are you bringing in if Daniel Jones is not here. So it's $22 million plus whatever salary that you give them. And I've seen people float out the idea of Dak Prescott and, the idea of, maybe Kirk Cousins is released by the Falcons. And, but then it's $22 million plus another $30 to $40 million on top of that if it's Dak. Now you're paying close to $60 million in cap space to your quarterback. So it's not a clean break. Now, can they move on from Daniel Jones? Sure. Do we see where they would move on to after Daniel Jones? No, it's an uncertain situation right now. So as far as the Daniel Jones stands go, I speak for myself. I don't hate Daniel Jones. I like Daniel Jones. I like Daniel Jones a lot. I've given Daniel Jones a lot of positive coverage and reinforcement, and I get along with him personally. And, I like Daniel Jones. Just because I'm critical of where Daniel Jones fits in this team moving forward doesn't mean I don't like Daniel Jones. And the Daniel Jones stands will tell you you're either with him or you're against him. And that's not true. Anyone who follows the show, anyone who follows me for as long as I've been doing this, covering the beat, and the reason I bring this back circle is that it's not always about Daniel Jones, even though one family, the haters, and the other family, the stands, want to make it all about Daniel Jones. It's not. It's about the team. It's about where the Giants are and where they go from here. The Giants made many mistakes because they made everything about Eli Manning and what this franchise was going to be for Eli. And they lost sight of the fact that it wasn't for Eli. It had to be for the Giants. And Eli is the greatest quarterback to play for the Giants. No disrespect to Phil Simms, to other guys in history that have put on that Giants helmet and represented them at quarterback. Eli's the best quarterback in franchise history. The mistake was made that they were making decisions based on Eli. None of these decisions are being made based on Daniel Jones. If they had taken a quarterback, it was about the long-term future of the Giants and where they can see themselves in a couple years. If they didn't take a quarterback, and that's what they have now, it's not a vote of confidence for Daniel Jones. And this idea that now all of a sudden, well, they really weren't looking at a quarterback. They were actually looking at an offensive lineman, as if you're trying to make it. I had some people tell me that it's the Giants leaking it out there to make it look like they were considering Joe Alt all along, and maybe they don't want to hurt Daniel Jones's feelings. Look, if you think Brian Daboll is worried about hurting Daniel Jones's feelings, that can't be a situation where they're worried about Daniel Jones mentally. If they're worried about him mentally as a quarterback to compete, they've already lost him. Then it's over. They need to rebuild Daniel Jones back up to be a competent, winning quarterback this year. And the last time we saw Daniel Jones in the first quarter against the Raiders in Vegas, he didn't look good. He was coming back from the neck injury. We know what happened the last play of the first quarter, first play of the second quarter, tearing the ACL, but he didn't look comfortable. He was overthrowing receivers. It continued to trend, a questioning of his progression, his ability to go through his progressions on the field. It just was a disaster last year. If that's the quarterback that is back on the field this year, Drew Lock will be the starting quarterback for the Giants a lot quicker than anyone anticipated. But Daniel Jones is going to get the opportunity to show that he can get back to where he was in 2022. They're going to give him that opportunity. But that doesn't mean that it's only Daniel Jones, that Daniel Jones is going to be the quarterback no matter what. It's not the same thing. And the quicker the haters and the stands come to some sort of understanding, then we'll have one family that covers the Giants and we move forward together, being honest, because there's a lot to criticize and there's a lot to analyze. And I think that's where Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are now post-draft going into year 3. So that's how I feel. That's where I'm at. Hopefully that makes a little sense. Hopefully I made you laugh a little bit. Hopefully people on both sides, I know you're not going to agree. And I know social media isn't a true representation of what the full fan base is, but I've heard a lot of it. I've heard, the idea that, I've always tried to stay in the middle. I try to stay in the middle and analyze both sides and be as fair as I can. What's fair to the Giants is that they're going to give Daniel Jones another opportunity, but they're going to give him an opportunity because they committed to him this money. Daniel Jones is part of this team. The reality is that I can be called a hater by one person and a stan and a homer by the other. And if you could be a homer and you can be a hater by saying the same thing, well then, from my perspective, I'm doing my job, because that means that I am answering to one side and I'm answering to the other side, but I'm not catering to either side. And that, to me, is how you do this job. So that's where we're at. So for all the 5 families, hopefully you can stand down, focus on what's coming next, because I think for the Giants right now, the next couple months are going to be very significant. It's not about Daniel Jones. If Daniel Jones can't play, Daniel Jones won't be on the field. And I truly believe that. And that's the way it's going to go forward. And if Daniel Jones can play and the Giants can compete and they can do better than what you anticipate, then I think Daniel Jones will have an opportunity here to show how far he can take this. But I don't think Daniel Jones is going to wake up all of a sudden and be Patrick Mahomes. Like, one side of this family war is believing. And I also don't believe that Daniel Jones is going to take the field and look like, a 12-year-old playing flag football and misfiring all over the field. But I don't know. I don't know if he's going to be that quarterback. He was that quarterback a lot last year, and some of that was on him. And I think they need to settle that out. It doesn't mean that I don't like Daniel Jones, and it doesn't mean that I want Daniel Jones out of town, which is some of you have said. So that's my settling of all in business. That's where we're at as far as that goes. And now let's get into the draft before we wrap up here a little bit. First off, I had told you I thought they were going to make the trade on Thursday night. They didn't. They didn't make the trade, and as it turns out, the Patriots were never close to making that deal. So they draft Malik Nabers. I had talked about Rome Odunze versus Malik Nabers. They ended up going Nabers. Look, he is an outstanding, big play waiting to happen receiver. whose speed is outstanding. He's explosive. The one stat I had for him, he had the most 10-plus plays, 20-plus plays, and 30-plus plays, that's yards, in college football last year. That's hard for one player to do, especially when you have so much talent out in college football, especially at the wide receiver position. So Malik Neighbors comes here. Look, it's not a waste of a pick if Daniel Jones can't get him the football, because then Daniel Jones won't be the quarterback. Malik Neighbors in this offense is to help the Giants and what they need to do as far as becoming more of a big play offense, having a draft, a wide receiver room that the last 3 years you've drafted Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, and Malik Neighbors. That is your core moving forward. Where Darius Slayton fits, we'll have to see how much they push him into that group and how many opportunities he may lose if Hyatt takes that leap from year 1 to year 2. And then Neighbors comes in. I don't think there's any doubt that Neighbors is going to be on the field. It's just a matter of how quickly he can get up to speed this summer. And stay healthy is important. Number 2, the second-round pick, Tyler Nubin from Minnesota. A little bit of a surprise for me because I wasn't sure how Joe Shane valued the safety position as far as positional value. They obviously like Nubin. Private visit at and workout at Minnesota with Brandon Brown, assistant general manager, and Mike Trier, the safeties coach. So Giants kind of kept this under the radar a little bit. Part of that is because Nubin is a clean prospect. They saw what they saw in tape. They saw what they saw in person. They had a workout with him. They liked him when they met with him, and they see him as a guy who can step in right away and really become a big-time safety in Shane Bowen's defense. Is he a Xavier McKinney replacement? Well, if Xavier McKinney wasn't here or was here, let's say if McKinney was here, they're probably not taking Nubin, but there's no reason why McKinney and Nubin couldn't be on the field at the same time. But I think Nubin comes in right away, and I think the Giants use some 3 safety packages, which Shane Bowen liked using in Tennessee. The onus here is now on Dane Belton. He's got to stay healthy, which he did last year, didn't do the previous year, and force his way onto the field. I think that is a big situation for him going into year 3. And I think it could be Pinnock, Belton, and Nubin as their 3 safeties, and then whatever comes after that, Javarius Owens, maybe he develops into a special teamer, and then maybe gets on the field at some point, but that's where we're at. So was I surprised that they went safety? A little bit, but I can understand it. Drew Phillips, went in the 3rd round to the Giants. I know there was a lot of speculation. The Giants should have gone for an offensive lineman. I told you this going in. If you looked at their depth chart and who they have and the commitments that they have, they brought in 4 veterans, 2 to start with Illuminor and Runyon Jr., and then the 2 guys that they brought, Schlotman and Stinney. These are guys that they want to be on the roster, that they want the veteran and experienced guys that have started games in this league, because they've gone the other direction the first 2 years and it's failed mightily. The drafted guys and give younger guys an opportunity, and then they hurt their development. But I do think that Joshua Ozudu and Marcus McKeithen have an opportunity to be a part of this line as reserves and then develop into starters. So they weren't going to draft over Josh Ozudu. They weren't going to draft over Marcus McKeithen. This front office still believes in those guys. And I think they believe with a new coaching staff, with Carmen Brasillo coming in, I think that they believe that these guys can contribute as reserves and then maybe earn spots, earn playing time if there are injuries, if guys get hurt. And I told you, Evan Neal is their right tackle going into the season. Now, could Illuminor win that job? Well, part of the reason has to do with what happens at guard. You know, all of a sudden, if you're looking at it and you say that the better combination is Illuminor at right tackle with Ozudu at right guard, or Ozudu at left guard and Runyon at right guard and Evan Neal on the bench, well, then they have to make that call. But I think they're going to have an opportunity, to see how that plays out in August. So I do like the pick of Drew Phillips. I think he's your starting nickel. I think that's going to happen this summer. I think you're going to see Drew Phillips become your starting nickel. I think obviously you have Deonte Banks on one side. I think they could bring in a veteran at their price if they can get someone at a prove-it price, especially if Darren Waller ends up retiring. They get a little bit of money back. I don't think they're going to go overboard and all of a sudden pay a guy $6-7 million. I mentioned Xavier Howard as a guy whose play has dropped off a little bit. He obviously had an injury last year, but I'd be curious if he would be willing to come in knowing that he has an opportunity to win a starting job on a one-year deal on a defense that has players around him. So it's not like Howard's coming here and the cupboard is bare. I could see him taking it. You might have to bump it up, maybe $3 to $4 million. So maybe that doesn't fit. Maybe an Ahkello Witherspoon is a little bit more of their price range. Spent last season with the Rams. One thing you got to know about Shane Bowen's corners, he wants you to be able to tackle. Witherspoon hasn't been a great tackler through his career. So that's one thing that I look at. Now, I know you're not looking at a corner and saying he's going to come in all of a sudden lead our team in tackles. You have to be willing, though. And I think that's kind of why I shied away a little bit from Witherspoon. But, could Nick McLeod or Cordell Flott factor in? Absolutely. Again, as I mentioned with Joshua Ezeudu, Cordell Flott was the youngest in his draft class 2 years ago. I think Cordell Flott has an opportunity to win that job. Now, he's got to get bigger. He's got to get stronger. I don't know if that's possible on his frame. He's a relatively smallish guy. So maybe he doesn't tackle as well. He's not physical enough on the outside to be in a Shane Bowen defense of what he's asking the guys on the back end to do. But I think if it's not a veteran brought in, I think Flott and McLeod will have an opportunity to kind of combine at that spot because McLeod's going to be on the field. The only thing is with the restricted free agency tender that McLeod signed for $3 million, it's not guaranteed. So McLeod has to make this team to get that $3 million. So it is possible that later on in the summer, they come to some sort of agreement where they lower the $3 million this year and they kind of split it over 2 years and McLeod gets a better deal longer term. But the cap hit gets lowered this year a little bit. That's something that they could do as they move forward here, trying to figure out what they're going to have on the back end. So I like Drew Phillips. I think he's a good player. He was on, if I did 6 mock drafts, he was on at least 3 of them to the Giants in that 3rd, 4th round range. So I like him as a player. I think he's good for the secondary. I think they need players. They need to keep trying to find that playmaker, to find those guys. I think Darnay Holmes is here for his special teams ability that he flashed last year and as depth. And I don't think Darnay Holmes is a starter in nickel. I think that ship has sailed. I think they'll play a little bit more zone, so we'll see how Darnay fits in there. But Drew Phillips got a good grade from me moving forward. Then we go to Saturday. Theo Johnson, tight end from Penn State. Giants knew him very well. He spent the week at the Senior Bowl. Shea Tierney was the offensive coordinator of his team. And I had Theo Johnson in a couple of my mock drafts to the Giants. When I did research of Shea Tierney at the Senior Bowl, I found quotes from Theo Johnson talking about Shea Tierney. That kind of set off a little bit of an alarm for me going into the draft that Theo Johnson was one of their guys. Not to mention Brian Dable's son, Christian Dable, was an offensive analyst at Penn State for 3 years. So he was very familiar with Theo Johnson. Now, I don't think Christian Dable walked in to the draft meetings and put his foot down and pounded the table for Theo Johnson, but it did mean something that Theo Johnson mentioned Christian Dable in his conference call with us after getting drafted by the Giants. So if you saw the call between Theo Johnson and Brian Dable, obviously Brian Dable was connected to Theo, spent a lot of time at Penn State with Christian being there. So I do think this is a very good, very smart draft pick. It's going to come down to development. Tim Kelly is the new tight ends coach. He was in Tennessee, I believe. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name, but when Chig was the tight end with the Titans, Tim Kelly was involved down there. So advance that tight end room. I don't think that this is a bad sign in any way for Daniel Bellinger or the guys they signed, Manhurts or Stoll. I think you're probably looking at those guys as your group, but we'll see how things play out this summer. But Theo Johnson, like him a lot of untapped potential. If there's any position in this league that you could look at where they're drafted doesn't necessarily correlate into how much success they could have. George Kittle drafted in the 5th round. Tight ends up and down the league are drafted day 2, day 3. So I think Theo Johnson has a good chance this year that by the end of it, he's one of the players on the offense that we're talking about. Now, I did have a chance to talk to Darren Waller on Friday, and he had not made his decision yet, but the more and more we see things as they spin forward, I think Waller's just waiting for the right time to announce that he's retiring. I think the Giants believe he's going to retire, but they're obviously not looking to push him out the door or make any statements that could be misconstrued regarding Waller. Waller basically said to me, and I know he's told others, that this is a situation for him. It's about his mental health. It's about where he's at. Can he commit 100% of what he needs to commit to the Giants? And let's take a step back, Giants fans. All you want to do is say, well, get out of here. His head's not in it. Now you have a guy who's sitting here who's telling you that he's trying to be honest and say, if I'm not 100% committed, I don't want to do that to my teammates, to my team. It's not fair to them. Maybe respect him a little bit. Maybe respect his wishes at this point. Because when Darren Waller hangs it up, you can analyze how bad or whether the trade was necessary last year and should the Giants have done it. No, it's backfired. They expected a lot more out of Darren Waller than what they got. And they took a chance, they took a swing, and it failed. But if Darren Waller leaves, you're going to get the cap relief, but you also have the dead cap hit. It's not a big difference between today and doing it a week from now. So just let it play out. That's what the Giants are going to do, and I would expect at some point we'll get final word from Darren Waller that he is going to retire. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. In the 5th round, Tyrone Tracy. Now, the more work I've done on Tyrone Tracy Jr., the Purdue running back, came from Iowa, was a wide receiver, converted to running back. The more research I do, the more I like. Initially, I looked at it as, okay, they're just taking a guy. They can see him as a kick return specialist. We've talked about how the kick returns are a big deal. Now it's going to be a play that changes the game. I think a year from now, we're going to be talking about how the kick return has now brought different playmakers into the fold for the NFL, and I think they want that. But I think Tracy's got a pretty good chance. I've read a lot about him. He could be their 3rd down back to start the year. Looks like he's very accomplished in pass pro, is a good receiver, obviously. He had experience as a wide receiver. So I could see a Devin Singletary, Tyrone Tracy pairing when this season, kicks into full gear in October. I wouldn't look past Eric Gray. I think everyone has formed their opinion on Eric Gray because of what he looked like as a kick returner, and I wouldn't do that. I think Eric Gray has something there as a running back, and I want to see him this summer kind of dedicate all of his energy into running back and see if they could turn him into something. There's no doubt the new running backs coach, Joel Thomas, being in New Orleans, having the kind of dual threat backs that he had. Alvin Kamara comes to mind, obviously. When you see a guy like Tracy, could he kind of factor in to that role? The idea of, Alvin Kamara was catching, 7-8 passes a game last year when they were working him into the passing game. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And then the final player, Darius Muasau, the linebacker from UCLA. I know there was initial reaction, the idea of, the Giants could have gotten this guy as a UDFA, an undrafted guy. Why'd they take him in the 6th round? Well, a couple things. One, there's connections. We know Michael Gabriel, the Giants special teams coordinator, came over from the Jets. He was actually the special teams coordinator at Hawaii. Muasau, before he went to UCLA, was in Hawaii. So there's a connection there. Gabriel knows him. So obviously they see him as somebody who can contribute on special teams right off the bat. The more research I did, the more people I talked to, I tend to wonder if the Buffalo contingent, Shane, Dable, anyone else who was up in Buffalo, sees a little Matt Milano in Muasau. 6 foot, 223 for Matt Milano, 6 foot, 225 for Muasau. Muasau was with a lot of the Giants coaches at the East-West Shrine Bowl. So they were all there. He had a great week. So I'd be interested to see, the more we hear, we get a chance to talk to coaches, assistant coaches as we move on into the summer, that I think there are bigger plans for Muasau. I know I tweeted this early on Saturday morning before the draft started. I had talked to some people in the organization, and they said they were looking at inside linebacker, and their inside linebacker depth behind Okereke and Micah McFadden is not great, because we know Isaiah Simmons is not necessarily a true inside linebacker. He's more of a sub-package guy. And then we don't know what they're going to do with a Carter Coughlin or a Darian Beavers. So they wanted another inside linebacker. And I think Muasau covers that. He may be the third guy in that group if they need somebody this summer. So expect him to get a lot of run. Expect him to get green dot work when he's on the field, and Bobby Okereke is not. So that'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on. But remember that Matt Milano, that is a name that I came across over the weekend that I think, and granted, we're talking ceiling now. The Giants haven't had a draft pick to kind of exceed expectations in a while. They need some of these guys to really hit. And that goes back to, we'll close this up. We appreciate you watching and listening to this show. We know you're all in, and obviously we're all in. I mean, heck, I'm talking 45 minutes by myself here doing this podcast with no guests today. So hopefully you appreciate the information and where we're coming from. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much and have you shut off the show. But I promised a big draft recap, gave you the stuff in the beginning as far as where we're at. Now it comes to Joe Schoen, and I know a lot has been made about Joe Schoen's comments in terms of they accelerated the process last year and maybe it was a mistake. And now he's talking about patience and the idea of being patient and building this team with core players, which they have some core players on defense. Offense, they're still trying to build. Look, I don't think it's Joe Schoen saying, hey, look, we're going to suck this year. You got to give us a break. But I do think it's one of those things where it's temper your expectations. They tempered their expectations last year. They tempered the expectations in year one. And the 2 seasons could not have gone any differently. I'm not worried about a seat being hot. I think they're aligned. I think they're moving forward. I don't think Joe Schoen is making decisions for his job. I don't think a quarterback would have saved a job or taken somebody off the hot seat with he and Brian Dable. I don't think that's in consideration right now. I think they're trying to build this team. They're going into year 3 because of what the Giants have gone through over the past decade. We have this preconceived notion as to how they're going to operate. I would try to forget what's happened in the past and consider where you're at now, your year 3. You need players to develop. You need guys to step up. And if you can get players to step up and you can point to the core that you have, that's when you know you're building a roster that looks good. Right now, you look at the roster, there's still holes. There are still unanswered questions. And I think that's something that Joe Shane and Brian Dable are very aware of. But they are who they are right now, and they've got to get the most out of it. And is there a way for this coaching staff to get the most out of the talent that they have? Well, they did it 2 years ago. You're going to hear a lot this year. Daniel Jones can't do it. They have no Saquon Barkley. They have no Xavier McKinney. What are they doing? What are they doing? What are they doing? Let's see how it plays out. Because if they have a comparable year to year one, we're not talking about hot seats. We're talking about now let's go find the next big thing for this team to get them over the hump. If they struggle like last year, well, then there are going to be a lot of questions in the offseason about are they heading in the right direction. But we're not there yet. It's May 1st. Not Drake May 1st. So that's where we're at. Appreciate you listening. This is our draft recap show. We will be back likely next week. We've got the rookie minicamp next week, and then we roll into OTAs the end of the month. So I will let you know on social media when our next All In podcast is coming out. But again, thanks to Paul Wood for always being that All In producer and for everything that our North Jersey crew did at MetLife last week. It's much appreciated for this show. We continue to build. We're going to continue to move forward and keep giving you what you need for being all in. So we're all in. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Make sure you keep up with all of our coverage on northjersey.com, and go Knicks, go Rangers. See if you can carry it a little bit for the next month or so and let us NFL writers kind of take a little step back and relax and exhale and then get ready for a long season that comes up way too quickly. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.